Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the August 12th, 2021 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. This meeting is being held both in person and electronically. All available members of the HRA, some staff and presenters are participating from the council chambers. Others are participating from their homes or offices. Before we begin, there's a few things that we'd like to cover. Today, community comment will be the only opportunity during the meeting for members of the public to participate in the HRA meeting. You are allowed to speak up for 3 minutes about anything that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. Again, feel free to call in or participate from the audience on anything that is not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to call in for community comment, call 800-374-0221. Conference ID number is 817-6028, 817-6028. Individuals in the room will be invited to come forward to speak first, then we will hear from those who have called in. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. For those in the room, the red light at your podium will turn on when you are out of time. Administrative Support Specialist Liz Olson will let anyone who calls in know if they go over the 3-minute mark. You'll also get a yellow warning light when you've got 30 seconds to go, so you should think about wrapping up your comments. We ask that individuals do not repeat information already presented. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. So thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting in a hybrid format. We hope there will not be any issues, but be assured that we'll do our best to continue the meeting as best we can if there are any difficulties from a technological standpoint. So now we will call the meeting to order, and roll call, please. Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Jackson. Here. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Now we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the meeting agenda? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as shown?
So published? Moved.
Get a motion?
Second.
And a second to approve the meeting agenda as shown. Commissioner Jackson, Commissioner Pierce made those motions and seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now is time for community comment. So if you want to call in or you want to visit with the HRA about anything that's important to you, we'll now hear from those residents who would like to speak, as I said earlier, about something that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. Speakers in the council chambers will go first, then callers will be allowed to speak. You can call in, again, the 800 number is 800-374-0221, and the conference ID number is 817-6028. An operator will ask for your name and street address to get in the queue to speak. Press star 1, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Are there any people on the line? Director Benner, all right. Anyone in the audience wish to come forward? Okay. All right, we're going to move on from community comment. We have no community comment this morning. And we have a couple of items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Let me first of all ask, does anyone care to remove an item from the consent agenda? All right, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Anderson to adopt the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda in a single motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we are on to reports and recommendations. And first matter we have here is something I think that we're all quite familiar with. We've all been on site, I believe. Is that right, Manager Noondorf? Have you had everybody out there to the site? And we're going to get a report on the Grandview pedestrian bridge. It's a project update for us all.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. If you've been in the Grandview area, you've noticed a lot of the construction that's happening to the sidewalks, to the roadways, and the project this morning we want to talk about is that pedestrian bridge. We have been able to visit the site with each of you and look at some of those existing conditions. What we wanted to do this morning was give you an update on that design. When you approved the construction contract about a month ago, you had asked us to redesign and make it essentially look better and operate a little bit better. And so we have this morning for you some illustrations of what the current design is, and also a recommendation to move forward with some changes based on some early input. But we want to have a discussion here today and just confirm whether or not we're going in the right direction. This morning, Chad Milner, our city engineer, is also with us, so if you have any questions, both he and I can certainly answer them. The quick status update is the construction contract was awarded back in June. The contractor is ready to go. We had given them some options to either start work this summer or next summer, depending on schedules, and they're ready to go this fall. So at this point in time, we can make some changes. It does make a minor impact to the schedule if we make those changes quickly, promptly. But a couple things to note, that if there's a substantial change in the design, we'll be looking at significant changes to the budget, the schedule, et cetera. If they're relatively minor changes, it should not be a problem. So this is a plan view of the overall project, just to better understand it. On the left of the image is the Jerry's parking ramp, and then right in the middle is the CP railroad tracks that we're trying to get over, and then on the right side with the trees and the landscaping area, that's the city's property, the vacant public works site. So the entire project is about 300 feet long, sidewalk, ramps, stairways, and a bridge to accommodate the hill, the elevation change, and then spanning over the railroad tracks. We had asked our designers to provide some better images, just so you get a better feel of the current design. So that we'll run through those this morning. The site will be heavily landscaped. We're looking at maintenance or low maintenance types of plantings, but a variety of trees and low plantings. Temporarily, the hill that's going to be established there will be sloped. Eventually that'll change. We'll get more fill as we figure out what we're going to do with the rest of the site. This image is if you're walking from the hilltop back over to Jerry's. Here's another aerial of the initial design for the bridge with some decorative panels. One of the first things we looked at was adding more decorative panels. That's what it would look like. Staff and our designers don't think that's necessarily the right direction. It starts to look kind of enclosed and almost like a cage in a way. So the challenge is to come up with an elegant design that really speaks to Edina and welcomes people to the site and encourages them to come visit the site. This image is taken from behind Walgreens, if you'd be looking towards the east. We also prepared 3 images of what it might look like with a roof or a partial roof. At our last meeting, you had encouraged us to pursue that further and see if that is possible. So this is a general design. This is the current design. Certainly this is a placeholder. We can make some more artistic changes. That's pretty easy. So this is the open air design. A lot of the concept here is to create a playful shadow. So that's why we've got those steel panels with the decorative holes punched in them. We explored putting a partial roof on it. Kind of looks like that. We explored putting a full roof over the bridge. And in this illustration, the roof would only be on the bridge. The bridge is about 80 feet long. We would not put a roof over the whole sidewalk. That's the rest of the block. We also looked at different examples of more artistic designs for those steel panels. We've We've used these before in other facilities in the city. They're fairly easy to custom make them. You can buy some that are pre-designed, prefabricated, but they do come in a whole variety of designs. And it's fairly simple to make a change to add more of an artistic approach to it. A few more examples we found of other facilities where they screened the facility with these metal panels. The image on the lower right, identified as H, is an example out of a bridge that we just found in a design catalog. But it has a very similar concept with that shadow design, but it takes a much more graceful, lighter approach to the walls that surround it. And just as a reminder, the reason that we're even looking at enclosing the bridge is to meet a safety requirement of the railroad. The only way the railroad will let us put a pedestrian bridge over the tracks is if we ensure that things cannot be dropped or thrown from the bridge. And that requires a 10-foot tall enclosure. If you look at most highways, they use a chain link fence or a mesh. We think there's a much greater level of design that's needed here, and that's why we're suggesting these types of metal panels. A few other examples. And these are the design criteria that we're suggesting we really follow. Number one, the facility has to be functional, has to be safe and functional. On the right side of the screen are the aesthetic suggestions. Based on some of the earlier discussions we've had in these meetings, we think that we can certainly amplify the public art aspects of this bridge. We've had suggestions to perhaps imprint the panels with the name Edina or Grandview or some imagery that celebrates Edina in the area. It was also suggested to have a local flavor and, not just some stock design that's you could see in any town around the country, but something that's more local to actually create that unique destination. And in fact, have people visit the site knowing that they're going to have a unique experience crossing the bridge. In past projects, we've created a fairly simple public input process to help shape that design. That's something we'd also recommend we carry forward here. So for the design process, we'd suggest engaging an art consultant to help lead that conversation and initially create some focus groups and get additional input from local residents, local businesses, our arts commission, other stakeholders in the area as well to guide some early concepts. The second step would be to actually have a small design competition and select the artist and the design of those panels. We've done this before successfully at the parking structures down at 50th and France, where we had ultimately 3 choices that were prepared based on community input. And then we posted it on Facebook, and we did a public input campaign. We had hundreds of people offer their opinions within a week. It was a very effective and prompt process. We'd encourage doing something similar to that here. So ultimately, our staff recommendation would be to continue with that current design of the open air bridge. As we ran through some of the images of what it could look like if it were enclosed or put a roof on it, we started to get concerns about safety and security. A partial roof could just be an attractive nuisance for people to climb on top of it. That's something we definitely don't want to encourage or make easier. And once you put a roof on top of it, if it rains or snows perfectly vertical, it would stay dry. But if there's any blowing rain or snow, you're going to have, it's going to get wet and it's going to take longer to dry. So we'd encourage not putting a roof on it. But we would also recommend that we explore other options for the walking surface to make sure that it's as slip resistant as practical. We do want to be cautious of snow and ice conditions in the wintertime. We'd also recommend that we continue with the direction of interior lighting of the walking surface and handrails, and also exterior lighting, so at nighttime the bridge looks special. Our second recommendation is to redesign the steel panels that wrap and enclose part of the bridge, being much more artistic in the approach rather than functional. And then thirdly, we'd recommend that we employ a fairly simple process to get public input as we design these art panels, so that it's not just an architect or a landscape designer, but we actually have that local flavor. So that's where we are. That's our update. As we move forward, it's very important that we get your input and direction to proceed. So we've got some questions in your report and on the screen here. The biggest issue is the rooftop enclosure of the bridge. If that's something you would like to proceed with, that can certainly happen, but it will require a complete redesign of the footings, the foundation, and the bridge. So if we're going to go that direction, we need to know now so we can start designing the right thing. And then with these aesthetic appearance recommendations, are you going in the right direction? Do you like what you see? Are there other suggestions you might have? So with that, I'll turn it over to you. As I mentioned, myself and Chad Milner are here for any questions, and we're looking forward to your input.
All right, thank you, Manager Neuendorf. Commissioner Anderson, you were the one that thought that the redesign or the design ought to contain ought to have a cover. And I'm just wondering if what your thoughts are with regard to the presentation and whether you have been convinced that open air is the best, or covered is still something that you would prefer to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the way that I view this is what constitutes success of the design and installation of the bridge. And what I come to, at least, is we want people to park at the ramp, come across, and utilize the site. So to me, everything that we do in order to encourage that is the right path, right approach. And, we deal from the 1st of November through middle of April. We deal with adverse weather conditions. And so my concern is that we have the potential for a spectacular project that is a community asset and which will draw people not only from the immediate neighborhood, but around. So that's really why I think that if it's covered, people will tend to use it more. If I could be assured that the walking surface is going to be perfectly clear and clean, that we're not going to have anybody slip or fall on the stairs or moving across, certainly. But the presentation here indicates that we're going to explore options. I don't know what those options would be. I don't know what budget constraints we have as well. But I'm sensitive to the point that the drying process is a concern. For me, it's more the freezing process that I just don't know how you really keep that thing clear without some measure of protection from elements. And so I'm open to suggestion on that, but that's the reason really for my thoughts about covering it, is because we need people to use it. Right now, we don't really know what's going to happen on the site. We're working on that. We don't know how much parking is going to be available, what kind of shared parking there is. We know we can't be parking up and down Arcadia. If we start on that proposition, we're going to have trouble. So I think that this is a pretty key element, and maybe the key design element in the whole process if we're actually going to encourage people to come over. So, thank you.
Yeah, what are commissioners' thoughts about the process that's being proposed to engage the public and maybe have a little design team? And if folks like that process, or recommended process, it strikes me that that team could address the open air versus covered element of the bridge. And in fact, I think it would be taking something away from them in terms of their responsibilities if we didn't give them sort of full license to look at that. Commissioner Jackson?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a very different perspective on the roof. And it's two things. One is, as a woman, when I'm out walking around, I want as much visibility and as much light as I can. I want, because it is kind of tucked away back there behind buildings. And so I want the sense that I can see around me and that people can see me. And so I feel in the eye so that I'm safe. The second thing is, whenever you add shadows, you're adding ice. And if you've been out walking in the wintertime, you walk where there's sunlight, there's no ice because it's had a chance to evaporate. You walk where there's shade and there's ice. So I think actually, if the protection is against ice, you want as much air and light as you can get. So I'd like to add that perspective to the discussion about the roof. So, we can take that to the public. It's a big cost to change it. It slows down the thing, and I think it makes it less safe. So that's my 2 cents on the roof.
So you favor looking for some other aesthetic theme other than what was initially recommended, and if we use that process that's been recommended of engaging the public in the area businesses, you're comfortable with that?
I am. The one thing I would want to say, because the whole theme of this site is that it's for the public, and this is a public piece of property that we're developing with that in mind, I do want to have Edina written on the bridge. I think that people should know that they're invited, this is their city, and we're proud of it. That's the one stipulation that I would put on the creative design. And plus the idea of light and air, because I really think that's important for safety.
Okay, good. Thank you. Commissioner Pierce, your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the open air for the bridge, I kind of think that it's a misnomer that it's going to be unsafe. But because I'm not an expert, but as I walk around in the city during the wintertime, I concur with Manager Jackson, or with Commissioner Jackson's comments. There are some areas that are safe where it's clear that they've been cleared. We've already had residents come talk to us about our use of salt, right? But there are some areas where we oversalt and it's safe. I happen to know that Cargill has a certain type of texture that can be sprayed in ramps to keep the surface from being slick. And it kind of just looks like pebbles of sand, if you will. But I know that there are ways to make the bridge safe. And so I don't know that I believe it's going to be unsafe across the bridge. Now, I say that for this point, where I am unsafe, I feel unsafe in the wintertime, is actually coming downstairs. And so the flat surface, as long as there's something that I can use as a guide, then I'll use that, and I feel relatively safe. But it's actually going downstairs that I don't necessarily feel safe. Whether there's ice or snow or anything on the stairs in the wintertime, I feel safer on a flat surface. And so with that, I think that there are ways that we can make it safer, but where Commissioner Anderson made me think about is actually liability. And so having the understanding of how liable, answering the question, how liable is the city if someone is going across the pedestrian bridge and they do fall and have an issue. And whatever that degree of liability is, I kind of think that might be a good litmus test in terms of how much should we invest to ensure that we mitigate any issues like that. But personally, I think I would use it. I think in Minnesota, in the wintertime, I wear boots. I just feel like for the most part, we're going to be hardy people. And as long as we can make it safe going up and down the bridge. And then when we were out there, Director Milner talked about the fact that it's going to be wide enough that it can be plowed. And as long as we're on top of it in terms of treating it, and then looking for other surfaces to add, to take away the slickness, I think we'll be okay. aesthetics, I always think it's a good idea to ask the community for ideas. Me personally, I'm fine with whatever the staff recommends, but I think it could be fun. It could be a fun way to engage the community on the project. And then the other thing I'll add, Commissioner Anderson mentioned this, we're not sure what we're going to do with the rest of that site, but I think this is a project that we could use a bit of excitement to say, this is coming, quote unquote. We're planning something. It's been vacant for more than a decade. We're moving on it to try and get a little bit more excitement about it. So I think this is, I think it can be a really good project, and personally I'm excited about the next phase.
Good, thank you. Commissioner Taunton?
All good thoughts. What this gets me thinking about is success, I think, is people using it. And so we've heard, Member Anderson talked about perhaps people not using it because they don't feel safe from a physical walking perspective. And Commissioner Jackson talked about not feeling safe from a perception of, the surroundings perspective. And it strikes me that there must be thousands of bridges and tunnels around the country where people have asked the question, how do you make it so that people will want to use it? I think of underpasses and overpasses. Underpasses suffer from this because they're very tunnel-like. People look and go, I'm not going in there. You go first. Tell me how it worked out. So that I would ask that, I think success is using it because it's going to be a critical part of this thing, is making sure that it gets used and that it's inviting. So I'm kind of agnostic on whether it should have a roof or not, whether it should have the sides and how much decoration, et cetera. But I want it to get used, and I want it to be a marquee as well. That's one of the 7 guiding principles for the Grandview area. So I do like that design part. So maybe it's a combination of asking the community what gets used and also doing a little more research. I suspect you already have done some on what gets people to use these facilities. I don't know if you or Director Milner have any thoughts on that, Bill.
Yes, happy to weigh in. We've not looked at any academic research on usability, but if you think about other examples in the community, there's several newer bridges at Centennial Lakes. And one of the things we did when we redesigned those or rebuilt them was to make them easier, shallower to get up and over. But those are all open air. We have staff to maintain and plow those and salt them in the winter time as appropriate. That seems to work fairly well. In my neighborhood, we have a city bridge that spans over the Minnehaha Creek. That's also an open air bridge. The floor surface there is wood, and it gets packed with snow in the winter time. That's a little bit different situation. There's actually a group of local neighbors that shovel the stairs. There's 2 folks that live within a couple houses, and that's kind of their contribution. And if there's an extra shovel there, you pick it up and you finish shoveling the stairs on that one. So there's different approaches to do that. But one thing we have heard and from our designers and also our research is that the perception of something being unsafe will prevent or reduce the use of it. So if it's too dark or too enclosed, you'll get that perception that it's unsafe. If it's bright, well lit, and if there's clear visibility so you can see into it and see out of it, people, men and women, just tend to feel more safe and more secure. So we want to make sure that it's definitely not tunnel-like. So those are a couple tips that we've learned so far.
Mr. Chair.
Well, that perception would also extend to the, if it looks like it's going to be slippery or blocked with snow or ice or the like as well.
Thank you. I would just add a couple more bridges that we should think about as we have participated in their construction over the last few years, are the two pedestrian bike trail bridges, one over the Crosstown and one over Highway 100 that are part of the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. Those are long bridges. They're over major highways, so it was important that they be open for safety purposes, so that light and wind to a certain degree can get in and help dry things up, and also the concern about not being enclosed over a long period. Those are long bridges in both cases, much longer than what we're talking about here.
And I'll just add one thing, the snow and ice maintenance, we do that. We can do it. I'm confident we'll be able to either figure it out with equipment or textures. You know, there's different epoxy textures in parking ramps. So I think the snow and ice, we're good at it, we can do it. I think how to get people here to use it, it's the aesthetics. You know, let us go to the public and build a bridge people want to come and see, if there's a name on it. And then it's really the key is the site next door, the old Public Works site. You know, that's what's going to drive people to come here. If we just build a bridge to nothing, people use it a little bit for Hilltop and back and forth, but it's really that site next door that's going to drive the use of this.
It strikes me that you've got some pretty good direction here, that folks favor the recommended process of engaging, I suppose, the business neighborhood and on a broader basis, some community members that would come up with some recommendations that they would make to the council that would be non-binding but nonetheless recommendations. And we can leave it to the aesthetics is one important issue for them to consider. And then I think we can look at this open air versus covered aspect of it too. As you mentioned too, if there was a recommendation on covered, it could certainly include lighting as part of that process. So, all right, is that enough guidance for you, Manager? Yes, Commissioner?
I would add to your list, I think it is important for us to call out the safety aspect. And so, part of our thought process for the design is ensuring that it's safe. And that we talked about two issues today. My comments are, I think we can figure out a way to do it. But I do think that those are things that are important, and if we can assure the community that it's going to be safe throughout, the cold and winter aspects, it's going to be well lit, it's going to be safe from that perspective. I think that's important for the community to know that that is one of the first things that we're thinking about as well.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good point to reemphasize. I think
Can I add
Manager
just one more
Newendorf
thing?
had that point as well. Yes, Commissioner.
So whenever we come up with what we're going to do on the site, I assume that's just going to tie in somewhere along the path between the end of the bridge and Arcadia? Is that?
That's exactly correct. Right now, when we, as a bridge starts to be built, the southern edge of the sidewalk that will be built is kind of a blank canvas. So as we better define what's happening on the vacant property, we'll be able to fit that seamlessly into the bridge. One of the things we've done is modify, or not modify, but write the construction contract so that that southern edge can be changed without incurring too much of a change order penalty. So as we understand better over the next couple months what the rest of the property looks like, we'll probably redesign some of the landscaping. There can be other ramps or stairways as appropriate to get to the rest of the facility. But yeah, it's important that it function together, not isolated from one another.
And what is the status timeline-wise on the rest of the site?
You can expect to talk about this site a lot on August 26th, your 2 meetings in September, and also at late October.
Okay.
So we're doing a lot of work to get some good options in front of you. We'll need some decision-making about what the rest of the property looks like.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner.
we didn't discuss this, it was in your presentation, and that's the ease of maintenance of these panels too. I want that to be part of the design criteria when we take it. I love the public input, but I want to make sure that whatever comes back is something that's not going to be a cost for high maintenance for the city, so it continues to look nice over the years.
Very helpful. Thank you. We'll
Okay, thank you.
proceed and bring back updates as we make progress.
Yeah, so I think you heard Commissioners Jackson and Pierce, I guess everybody tell you, we concur with your analysis on it of feasibility / safety / long-term maintenance in one category, and aesthetics, the coupling of those elements of it. So I think we're set to go.
Great, thank you.
All right, and you have the next matter as well.
I do, and I'm going to run through my presentation a little bit faster on this one. You have a full agenda today, so we want to keep rolling. The next project is completely different, in every regard. We wanted to bring you an update on the development project at 70th and France, the U.S. Bank site. As you know, we've been talking about that over the last several months. The developer has requested that we use tax increment financing on the site. Staff thinks that is a necessity to actually achieve the bold vision that's in mind for the property. You've heard in the news about escalating construction costs. It's real, and it's damaging to this project and many other projects. So after a lot of discussion, a lot of number crunching, a lot of time to understand what the costs are and what the forecast looks like for costs. As we've met with the developer, they've reached the conclusion that a partial redesign of the property is going to be essential in order to make it financeable. So over the next month or so, they'll be submitting revised plans for the property. A lot of the costs still are high, though. I mean, the redesign is intended to bring the construction costs down without sacrificing that quality and the vision, and still achieving something that's bold. And as we've looked through the numbers, through the pro formas, they've been very open in sharing their budgets with us and their pro formas. So we've met with, staff has met with the developer. We've engaged our legal and financial advisors to go through the numbers together as well. We're of the opinion that in order to achieve something bold on this property, that the use of tax increment financing is going to be required. Even if they downsize and bring the cost of the project down, it's still a very expensive project to build. So we wanted to have the quick discussion here this morning just to get some of your thoughts about some of these anticipated changes. This whole redesign will require 2 steps. There's the whole zoning conversation that'll play out through the Planning Commission and City Council. In order to actually get a financeable project, those zoning changes will have to be approved. I mean, they'll have to be, of course, we're not going to lower our standards, but there's that step. But rezoning alone won't get the project built. There's still going to have to be a public financing component to this. If through a thorough review and evaluation process, if we can hit both of those two milestones, we think we can move forward. If we only get one of those hurdles cleared, the project will go back to the drawing board. So we just want to be really, really frank about that. So as we've had discussions with the developers and some of their architects, there's a couple elements that would, of course, remain in this new design. They're committed to still fully embracing those design guidelines in the Southdale district and subdividing this 6-acre property into 4 more human scale or walkable pads that will remain. Having the bold vision, multi-story, mixed use, more of a walkable, urban type feel for the site is still something that's an essential piece. Heavily streetscaped with landscaping and sidewalks and public art, that's all continuing to be part of the conversation. But a couple things that will be changing. are essentially the office building, and that's site B on the drawing, and then also the mixed income residential, the 9-story residential in site C. The tallest property, the residential high-rise just across from the Galleria, will essentially remain the same. There might be some minor changes to the podium, but that will essentially be about the same. I think that's at 24 or 25 stories, high-end luxury housing, and the bank would remain the same. Those pieces work very well. The biggest cost hurdle here is the cost to build the parking in the base or the podium of the office building. And so the major change that we're expecting to see is to reduce the height of the office building, remove the 5 layers of parking, and just build a 5 or 6-story office building on the corner. That would be, of course, a Class A office building for the community. And then that mixed income residential piece, Site C, would change completely. And rather than being an additional housing complex, that would become a standalone parking structure. So those are that's the fundamental change we're expecting to see. But as we've worked with the developer on some of these ideas, we're cognizant those are big changes. And the developer is in a situation where if we think we can find a way to be okay with those changes from a public finance, they'll go ahead and redesign and bring it through the zoning process and that whole review. If there are some deal breakers that you see in here for public financing, we should let them know so they don't waste their time and something else can happen on the property. So the project itself is still mostly privately financed, but they are looking at a pay-as-you-go TIF note, similar to what we discussed before. In this case, the TIF would be used for the same items that we discussed previously. But first, let me tell you what it won't be used for. Sometimes there's some hot buttons here. We would not use TIF to build the office building itself, nor the high-rise residential. We would not use TIF to pay for private parking for guests or residents of the apartments, or for the executives in the office building. Those private elements would not be TIF eligible. And also the bank, we would not pay for the design of the bank. That's a fairly simple project. But where the biggest financial gap exists is still in getting this whole site redesigned and turned away from a 1970s era, big building in the middle of a property surrounded by parking, but completely redo the entire site. New roads, new sidewalks, new utilities, and then it's that parking. In this case, by constructing a standalone parking structure, there's a way where we could put a public easement on it and really move towards that district parking approach, but have the developer pay for it rather than the city pay for that directly. We're estimating that the gap is still on the high end, 18 to 20 million in that range. We haven't gone through any numbers, but if we do proceed, expect to see a request somewhere in that general area. So to summarize, after going through the numbers for months with the team, staff is of the opinion that to achieve that bold vision, that we're going to have to continue to consider the use of TIF on the site. Too early to get into the specifics. We haven't seen numbers, but we expect that to be necessary. And then the second thing I mentioned when we started, in order to get something bold and exciting and 21st century on the site, rezoning will have to happen and public financing will have to be part of the conversation as well. If the developers only secure zoning without financing, they've got nothing. If they achieve financing without zoning, they have nothing. So we just want to be crystal clear on that. And at this point, staff is not planning to do any more work until we hear from you. If you think you can be okay with some of these major changes and still consider public financing, the developer, I think, will keep going. If there's deal breakers in here, we'd be happy to hear those today, and the developer can know how to respond and react with their future plans. This morning, we do have two representatives from Mortensen Development. Nate Podratz is here this morning to answer any questions, and Brent Webb is also here. They're two of the key folks at Mortensen we've been working with for months, and I don't think we'll have any more detail than I just presented, but we'd love to hear from you. Are these changes to the parking and the elimination of the mixed income or the affordable piece, is that acceptable to still consider and discuss the use of TIF? And with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Member. I think it might be helpful to hear from the development team as to some of the issues that they've faced, so we get that information directly. At least it would be helpful to me if you want to quickly comment. I'm sure there's probably fairly uniform disappointment that we haven't been able to go forward with the main theme here that we approved, but understand you're coming back here because it's a necessity that you come back.
Right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. A little louder? Good morning, everyone. Good to be here with you
Maybe
again.
microphone up a little bit, Mr. Podolak. Yeah, thank you. Brent?
Promised I would not drop my mask. But good morning. It's really good to be here with everyone again. I know there are a couple new faces here with Commissioners Pierce and Commissioner Jackson. It's nice to meet you, unless you exclude a wave at the parade. I don't think we've met in person, but it's been a longer journey. It's been about a year. We marched down this path, starting the last cycle. We went through all of the approvals to get our PUD approved, and it's been a tremendous partnership with Bill and Stephanie and city staff and planning commission and council members along the way to accomplish a lot of what we've been able to do in the last year. Mr. Kendall knows that we've made some good progress with U.S. Bank itself, and have come to a point where we have the ability to subdivide these parcels and to build the bank branch. However, as you're seeing across the marketplace today, commodity pricing, supply chain issues, lead time issues, there are tremendous pressures in the marketplace, and we've experienced that as we've continued to align our budgets with our design. We have 30-year veterans at Mortensen Construction that are saying they've never seen market conditions like this, and so we're trying to adapt as well as we can. I mean, we have a very wide purview just nationally as a construction firm, and I think we've got a great direction here that we can take to still accomplish a large majority of the design experience guidelines to promote this district evolution that we're so desiring to do in this corridor. We've seen, just specifically to Mr. Mayor's comment, we've seen pricing increases that can range from single-digit percentages up to over 100%, 200%, based on different categories within the construction cost budgets. We think that there's going to be some level of stabilization, but we've been saying that to be totally transparent for a few months, and we haven't seen that. But our ability right now to underwrite this particular transaction and hedge with some contingencies and some escalation estimates, we think that we have a budget based on this redesign that should allow us to advance this transaction. Brent, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, can you guys hear me with this mic?
Ken.
A few other comments just to add to what Nate said. I mean, we're here too because we've had a strong partnership with Bill and team, and I think this collaboration has really led us to this point. I just really wanted to touch on the fact that, we did really embrace this idea about affordable housing on site. We did not take it lightly. We've been working with Stephanie for over a year on how we could achieve this. And once we found out that we did get approved for our PUD back in December, we dug in right away. We actually set a meeting with Stephanie right in the beginning of the year, and we worked down this path through an RFP process. We talked to Aon, we've talked to PPL, we've talked to Ecumen. We've also talked to Common Bond as well. And through that process, we actually interviewed them. They presented different concepts that we all evaluated as a team. We ended up working with PPL because we determined they were a great partner, but we also had confidence that they could be creative and also execute on affordable housing. And as we went down this path and as we were learning about the pricing, we just determined that it was not going to be feasible to have affordable on the site. And we didn't take it lightly. We tried to work on different scenarios with PPL. We asked even if they had other developments in the pipeline in Edina that we could contribute to, and unfortunately I do not. So as we've been talking with Stephanie and staff, we still think we plan on doing this buy-in, but we're not going to give up, and we're still trying to pursue another affordable housing project, maybe a natural occurring one within the city of Edina. So we do understand that this is very important, and we do want to figure it out.
And just to add, going back a year ago, our goal was really solving to perfection, as it relates to the design experience guidelines alignment for this particular design. Bill, thank you for your presentation. Just to give an order of magnitude, we're talking about almost 1 million square feet across 4 different projects here in this corridor. I think we still align very well to most of those design experience guidelines and really connect to that district evolution that we're desiring to perform.
You just became Ted Carlson, Orion Development's on the screen.
Uh-oh.
So
We don't want that.
Did somebody take a picture of that?
yeah, Ted should be flattered by that. We'll make sure we let him know that. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I think in particular with 2 new council members, 2 new commissioners, it's important that they heard your voice on this, because we know how hard you worked on this and how reluctant, Mr. Rev, you were to make a decision to probably let this affordable housing go and go to the buy-in concept and do it somewhere else, allow the city to do it somewhere else. So, those were tough decisions to make. So stand by. Commissioners may have questions for all of you. And Commissioner Staunton, did you?
No,
Oh, okay. I thought I saw your hand go up next to my, you were just adjusting your mask. Commissioner Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a general question, I think. So the original design, how much of this is a timing issue? You talked about the construction market, the development market, the cost increasing anywhere from 1% to double digits for certain aspects of development. How much of it is really based on that? If this was a different point in time, then your current design would work. Or tangential to that, is it actually that the design in and of itself you think is not a great design in terms of I guess I'll say profitability?
A couple points, Commissioner Pierce. The original design included, again, it was aligned to the design experience guidelines, so it included integrated parking, specifically in the commercial building, which made it pretty expensive. But prior to the escalation that we saw, which started really in the fall of last year, we had a project that we think worked. But given the probably double-digit increase as a project as a whole on the construction side, that no longer is palatable. And so pulling those 500 plus stalls out of that commercial building and creating this standalone ramp, which I think aligns with one of the district parking strategies that the city had going back a couple of years ago, does create this destination. And our focus is really the walkability, the connectedness. We have the subdivision, the wide sidewalks, the street rooms, and many of the attributes that we're trying to maintain within the design experience guidelines.
And I can just add something. I think we all know that construction pricing historically has never really gone down. And we've never really articulated what we're contemplating for a schedule, which is kind of getting towards your timing question. So our intent would be that we would start the bank branch either at the end of this year or the beginning of Q1 of 2022. That bank branch will take about 9 months. There is a delay that we're anticipating because of supply chain, so we technically can't even start sites A and sites B and C until likely towards the end of 2022, based upon that timing. All of our pricing and costs contemplate that time schedule.
Any follow-on, Commissioner? Commissioner Pierce, any follow-on questions?
I know this is a simplistic question, but maybe if I word it this way, if we believe in the original design, it makes me wonder if we're at a point where we can't make this work today, is there a future point where we think it might work? The financial aspect of it might work, as opposed to making a decision to either not move forward at all, kind of go back to the drawing board, or find additional funding through TIF to make it more palatable from a financial perspective. And what I would want to avoid is this simplistic argument of just saying, well, if now is not the right time, then why don't they just wait, right? And I know it's more complicated than that, but I think that I'm trying to get a sense of, frankly, how would I respond to that if someone said, well, market says don't pay 300% increase to build a house, right? You wait till the market stabilizes, and of course it could still stabilize at the height of the market, but it'll stabilize somewhere in between there. And then it feels like we'd have a better sense of where we are. And so that's what I'm trying to gauge with commercial development. I know it's different than, say, residential, but that's what I'm trying to get a sense of.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Pierce, that's a question we grapple with every day. I would tell you the house view at Mortensen Construction is that going back and having lived through many cycles the last few decades, we typically only see a plateau of costs. We don't see a pullback because you've got averages, law of averages. You've got different components that are up, different components that are down potentially, but you also have labor rates built into that. So what happens, in the last cycle, there's a plateau of costs. Once revenue allows you to add growth into your modeling, that allows you to then activate a development. So, but we don't know how long that'll last. But we're willing to take that risk, as Brent mentioned, in having forecasted some potential increases going forward. We're willing to take that risk as a construction company and developer. We're generating a tax increment here that doesn't exist today, and hoping to generate hundreds of jobs through the office, commercial building and retail and apartment. So for us to say that we should just wait, that also introduces a whole nother set of risks.
And let me chime in on some of the use of the TIF on this site. So the current proposal looks at using tax increment for 15 years. Other sites, we've looked at a 26-year term. 15 years is all that state law will allow on this property, unless we go and try to get a special law passed, which could take years. So at this point, theoretically, we would pledge all the tax increment that's created to the project. And that's the $18 to $22 million range. So if we'd want to go in deeper or bigger, there's no more TIF available. I mean, that would look, I guess the city could take out debt on the developer's behalf and become an equity investor. That's something I don't think we've ever done or would maybe want to do. So at this point, we're kind of all in the TIF side. We did talk about pursuing grants. That could, bring in $1 million or $2 million. But right now the gap is, it's several million dollars away. And a grant here or there, while very, very helpful, isn't going to close it. And waiting 5 years isn't going to make a big difference in that regard.
I think Commissioner Pierce raised a really interesting issue for both of you gentlemen from Mortensen, which I consider to be one of the finer contractors, developers, builders in the country. So I'm assuming this is part of your analysis across the range of work that you're doing, that you see some of these prices stabilizing at a higher level on a going forward basis. So I think this question was really important, and your answer was really important to consider too, in the context of why can't we just wait for a better day? So Commissioner Anderson or Commissioner Jackson, questions?
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. Could you, what are you thinking about in terms of the parking ramp? Are you thinking about 4 stories, 5? I don't, maybe that was brought out here and I missed it, but I don't think so.
I'm sorry?
Maybe it was brought out here, and I don't see it anywhere.
I think there was maybe one note in the memo that Bill had, but we're anticipating about a 6 to 7 story parking garage.
Uh-huh.
So
And-
that'll comprise approximately 500 stalls.
Okay.
But we haven't designed it in any detail yet, which is why you're not seeing any illustrations, but we'll have that in the package that we'll submit by the end of this month for Planning Commission.
Okay. And the design features about that's a significant structure just to land in there that would be, of course, district parking, but how would that look and how does that tie in to your overall design on site?
Sure. And so we've been studying the standards, recent standards and precedent around the city, and hope to adhere, to those precedents. I think, fortunately, this site is tucked away. It's an interior site, within this corridor, so it's not only mid-block, it's internal, so that visibility will be pretty limited. But for us, we need the aesthetic to look and feel, really good, because this is an ecosystem that we're trying to create within this master development, and we have users that are office, commercial, retail, and residential, and so our design goals will hopefully mirror something similar to Nolan Main's, the north parking garage on Market Street.
Okay. Any comment on the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal article, I think that was yesterday, about the near future, at least, of commercial office space? Have you read it? Okay.
I did not see that article.
I'll send it to you, and maybe at a future date we can discuss that. It's a fairly negative projection. It caught my eye in reading that yesterday, so, but you don't need to comment on that. Just throwing it out, I'll send it to you.
Oh, please. I mean, we are doing other spec office, as a matter of fact, and our house view is there is a level of functional obsolescence out there, and as we focus and continue to hone in on our design, that'll likely include healthy building components, and we feel that the highly amenitized, more neighborhood setting with walkable access is an amenity for today's office tenants.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Mr. Webb, did you have something you wanted to add on?
I was just going to add that it's a trend that we've seen across the country too, that, in a lot of urban centers, there's been transitions for office to the suburbs. And so it's something that we're obviously understanding that might play out in this location at 70th and France.
Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate the discussion about the struggle to give up the workforce housing. I have to say that was by far my favorite part of this project. The idea of having a place for our retail workers and our healthcare workers to live here in town and not commute, that was a really big selling point for me, and I'm very sad to see that go. So I think I would just want to raise some transportation issues. Again, that was one of the things that I saw as something that would ameliorate traffic, allow people to live here in town and not have to move out to the extremities to find a cheap place to live, or affordable is a better word, and that they could live and work here in town, and I see that going away. I also, I have a question. Is there any bus stop or public transit access on this site? Do you know? I don't think there is. I don't remember seeing one.
Not in the interior of the site, but
Okay.
but it is along France.
Along France, there's a bus stop. Okay. Because I think as you go forward in the zoning, today I read in the paper that St. Paul is considering eliminating minimum parking. And as you go forward in the zoning, the idea of putting in additional a parking ramp instead of affordable housing, and just the number of cars, it's going to be a tripping point, I think, in the Planning Commission. They'll raise some pretty serious issues about that. I know there was going to be parking buried, and this is a more environmentally positive thing to have the ramp, because the buried parking is very expensive and very concrete, intense. This will be concrete as well, but I know it costs less. But I guess I just need to red flag the transportation issues to that. And so, Mr. Neuendorf, I guess one question I have for you is, if we're moving the parking places from the office building into this ramp, do we have any sort of projection on what the district parking needs would be and how this would be an anchor for that? Because I think, like I said, I am just deeply disappointed in loss of that workforce housing. And I'd like to see something else that's a big public benefit that will help anchor the Southdale vision. And is that, what's anticipated for district parking?
Yeah, great question. So we have not done a comprehensive count of district parking needs. This would be our first one. But the intention is to move away from individual private parking where this parking lot is just for these folks, and then the neighbors have to build their own just for theirs, and they're both half used. We'd rather just start to share a little bit more. It all sounds easy until you talk to the lenders, and then they won't finance a project that isn't parked. And in this case, we have the 6 bus serves the area, I think twice an hour. Metro Transit is working on the E line, which is more the arterial bus rapid transit, but that station stops at 66th. Yeah. We're at 70th, so we're still 4 blocks away to get to that station. Actually, a little bit more than that. So to answer your question, we don't have an overall count of parking stalls. But if this ramp would have about 500 stalls in that general range, we would secure a public easement for all the stalls that are not, the secured, heated, executive type stalls, which would mean that they could be used by the visitors to this site, the employees of this site, but also on the weekends and other times during the day. You could park here and walk across the street and go to the Galleria rather than parking twice. You could just leave your car and just walk across the street. So we think it does aid the whole walkability and reduces the overall parking count, but we don't have a specific number. And at this point, I've not seen in our budget, I don't think we've planned to do any kind of overall need. But having 500 to start with is a fantastic first step.
Yeah. So I'll say I'm just super reluctant to use public money to help finance parking, and I think I've made that clear before. And so I do appreciate the explanation of what's going on, and I understand the market forces are just terrible right now. They're just absolutely terrible. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that going forward in the planning process, that there will be a lot of questions about the accommodating cars and what we can do to, look at our carbon footprint and what this is going to do. So I think, the analysis of if there is a better carbon footprint for this parking ramp than for the buried parking, that would be a really good selling point for me. And I guess I'm sad that this is what's going forward, but we can't change the overall market of materials. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Spartan? Anything?
Bill, do we have a policy in terms of how much of a project we are willing to finance with TIF and what things we are willing to finance with that percentage?
We don't have a formal policy for that, but we follow the best practice, which is typically 10% is where we try to cap public involvement in any project like this. As we started talking with the developers months ago, I think at some point we were about 16%. I think we may have even been north of that at some point, which was just too much. It just it felt like too much of a too much of a gap. So we're striving to get to that 10% level or less. That is best practice in the industry. We think we can get there, but we only get there if we can get the costs under control.
So is this 18 to 22 million in that 10% range?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Because one of the things I can appreciate, my first reaction was, well, if this project is changing so much, why are we talking about it here? We should be talking about it at the council. But I get the the kind of catch-22. You got to have both pieces to it to make it work. So maybe not specific to this project, but I think we should be more clear in our kind of expectations with the development community, so that they can count on how much they can get and for what kinds of things they can get, so they're not stuck in this spot of, you know, trying to ask about the financing before they ask about the land use, or ask about the land use and then not be able to finance it. You know, it seems like this is a recurring theme, the 7200, 7250 project. We went through a lot of angst and got it approved, and then it couldn't be financed. So I'd like to see us sharpen that up a little bit. I love flexibility. I love being able to make a one-off decision, but I think it might be a better practice for us to be more precise about what things we're willing to do, so that folks like these guys will know in advance what we can do and what we can't do.
Thank you. I think all of us had that kind of sinking feeling when we may have felt this coming, but to see, as Commissioner Jackson said, the loss of that workforce housing is difficult to deal with. But I do know that you care deeply about that, wanted to do it on site. And hopefully in the broader neighborhood, we can still accomplish that, like we have with the AAM project down on 77th, and we keep people in that district, because I think many of us have been able to foresee a time when that whole Southdale district was a village unto itself, where people could walk to work or grab a little circulator bus route, and whether you're a nurse or working in retail, you know, you're able to work, you're able to live close to where you work, and your transportation was accommodating. So those three legs of the stool really work together, that balancing of jobs with work and with where you live. And so that whole thing became part of living and not part of the effort you're making to make a living. And so let's hope we can accomplish that, because I know that on the buy-in that won't be insignificant either. And it'll give Manager Hawkinson some real flexibility in terms of making recommendations to the council. The structured parking, I'd want to make sure that it does not look like suburban parking ramps of the past, that it has some kind of a skin on it, like we did with TCO, with Twin Cities Orthopedics, or something, you know, if you do it right, a structured parking ramp with the proper skin on it could look like a piece of public art. And that would be another nice public element of it, to have a skin on a parking ramp that looked like a piece of public art. So keep that in mind too, and because it's tough to swallow going to structured parking, fully understanding, you know, on the part of everybody up here, that the costs of being underground as opposed to the cost of doing structured are significantly different, and that's why you reluctantly came to that conclusion. I think we all understand that as well. So do the best you can with, you know, the aesthetics will be important on this thing, because it is supposed to be cutting edge. We were willing to make this public investment because it pushed the vision out that we had on the design principles. It embraced those design principles, so don't lose track of that. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble downstream here if those aren't fully embraced. So those are my comments. All right.
Well, thanks. That's very, very helpful. So we'll keep moving forward. In the next couple weeks, I think the Planning Commission and City Council can expect to see a new site plan, and we'll go through that process. But then also expect to hear about financing on this later this fall, depending on how the overall zoning is received. And that's something that if there is unity in that, we want to keep moving forward. They've got a bank to build and other things to follow. So thanks very much.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for being with us this morning. Really appreciate you being here. It was helpful to the conversation. And now Manager Hawkinson has the next matter, which is the update for the HRA on the Housing Strategy Task Force Implementation Plan, which is about a 35-page document, if memory serves me right here. Got a hard copy of it for myself, so I can reference it as time goes on. And Manager Hawkinson.
Thank you all. Good morning. I will try to speak really fast because I see we have about 10 minutes, and this is a big topic. So last December, you all adopted the housing, well, two of you weren't on the commission, on the HRA yet, but the HRA passed the Housing Strategy Task Force report and charged staff with creating an implementation plan. After meeting with staff from a variety of departments, I am presenting the implementation plan and seeking approval to include certain strategies in the 2022 and 2023 Department and Commission work plans. There may be questions of which I am not able to answer, so I am going to be leaning on Executive Director Neal to help me out with the whole process of how the work plans work and get approved. All right, I'm gonna have to move over here. Before I dive into the plan, I'd like to once again recognize the members of the task force, the city staff, and our consultants, as are on the slide. The picture of Homer looking really confused was me when I was told that we were going to create a housing strategy task force to try to come up with an overall general strategy for the city. So it was like an overwhelming task. I think now we're at the implementation, so I'm a little less confused right now. So the report, as you know, was the culmination of many spirited debates among the task force members who held widely disparate views on the majority of topics we discussed. So in April of 19, the City Council formed the task force. In December, we presented it after 45 meetings that the task force had. We presented the report. And again, you directed staff to create the implementation plan. So over the last few months, we are meeting, looking at the report, and ranking the items on, yeah, these are high reward, low cost, versus to this is going to take a ton of effort, and there's really not a lot of reward in that. We are also looking at the various items with whether or not they were already being implemented, just because of our daily course of work, whether or not there's something that we could see moving forward on, or whether or not they're outside of the purview of the city being able to even implement them because we didn't have the statutory rights or the legal authority to do so. And then the idea is to carry forward the ones that could be implemented that aren't already being implemented in the next 2 years. There are 4 main goals. And within those, there were over 40 strategies. So the goals, again, were promote life cycle housing, amend land use regulations to enable a more diverse housing stock, reduce building costs, and encourage sustainable design and technology. And then, as I said, in how I framed the implementation report that you received in the packet was on what's being done, what could be done, and what we really don't have the authority to do. So even though it's not a linear, they're not presented linearly, like within these 4 goals, they're organized in the other ways of like how to actually implement them. So this presentation today breaks them out in a different way. This breaks them out in who will be responsible for doing the implementing. So there are 4 strategies that are within the purview of the Community Development Department. I'm not going to read these all as they're included in the plan, and that would be really time consuming. But I just wanted to show you who's responsible for them, to give you kind of a scale and scope of how it may affect various work plans for various departments and commissions. Some of the commissions have already started working on robust work plans that do not take any of this into consideration. So this was done in isolation because they're created by the task force. They met with the different commissions, but they felt like they needed to go beyond what the commissions were already thinking about. So for the Planning Commission, between this slide and the next, they would be responsible for 8 strategies. Some of these pertain to allowing accessory dwelling units and upzoning certain parts of the city for missing middle and other types of housing. If you recall, the task force was created after the approval of the comprehensive plan and possibly in response to the feedback you received because of the passage of the comp plan. To be fully transparent today, some of the strategies proposed by the task force run somewhat in opposition to the comp plan and would require some rezoning, such as ADUs, missing middle, upzoning, along transit corridors, and other things. So that is something to take into consideration when we want to put these on the work plans for the different commissions, such as the Planning Commission. So the picture here does show the ADUs, because that comes up in a couple of different areas. And then here's some more of the strategies that would be under the Planning Commission. Again, they're in the packet, and for interest of time, I'm not going to read each one of these. But there has been a lot of talk since I've been here about missing middle, but missing middle, in order for that to occur, does exceed the current zoning and land use that is currently approved in the comp plan. So those are difficult discussions because they don't align with current small area plans, and they don't align with the current land use plans. Finance, there's even some that would be added to the finance work plan. There are 3 items that would be added to the EEC, and the sustainability would be under the purview of the sustainability coordinator. There's one that would fall under communications, just to increase the awareness of the range of housing variety. And I have, addition Edina and agenda Edina, just because I could get those logos. I'm not proposing these. I would leave these in the hands of the communications department. And that's, to be really succinct, this is what the work plan is to try. The implementation plan does lay out what I think could be added to the various work plans for 2022 and 2023. And then as we go through the work plan drafting process, what you all think should be just dropped and not considered, what you think should be explored and added as we move forward with planning for the next couple of years. So I think I did that in record time. I'm done with my presentation.
You are. All right, very good. Questions for Manager Hawkinson? She is looking for action today on the implementation plan, and would like a motion to approve the implementation plan and direct staff to incorporate into future work plans as recommended. Folks on the HRA may have questions, and Manager Neal, Director Neal has some input here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only additional input I'll give you is just the context of what your approval means today, and that is that these items, which we've used sort of the same model that we did with our Race and Equity Task Force, where we created a recommendation, we created an implementation plan that came back to this body for approval, and that was your signal to staff to begin implementing the findings of that task force and of this task force. In this case, what we're asking you to do is to approve the inclusion of these recommendations into work plans that eventually come back to you for another review in connection with our budget later down the line, particularly if they are part of a board or commission work plan. So you do get another crack at some of these items.
Questions for Director Neal or Manager Hawkinson? Commissioner Stoughton?
So would it be fair to say that what you're looking for is if there's missing things here, as opposed to, some of the things that'll come back to us, we'll have another chance to think about whether it's done the right way or
Agreed.
But on the missing pieces, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me, and you alluded to it in your presentation, was in the life cycle housing strategy, we seem to focus on these elements of affordability and then maintaining a diverse housing stock. But there doesn't seem to be anything about changing to create the opportunity for more housing stock that doesn't exist now. That's that missing middle, so to speak. Am I missing that, or is that not really part of the implementation plan?
Chair, Commissioners, the items that are in the implementation plan were pulled directly from the report. So I did not change or edit or add to what was in the report by the task force. I've just, they laid out their strategies and I put them in categories. They're different strategies. So if they're missing, then they are also not missing from the report.
Okay, so basically, to be more blunt about it, the notion of rezoning to permit accessory dwelling units or permit, transition areas between commercial and single-family residential, is that in there?
Yes.
Okay. And
Sure,
what's the timeline plan for exploring that?
Chair, Commissioners, the timeline for exploring that would be to add to the next year's work plan.
This coming year?
This
So the
coming
planning commission would look at it.
2022
Okay.
work plan would be to revisit the concept of ADUs and upzoning along transitional areas.
Okay.
We would propose to add this to their, in particular, the Planning Commission has a number of priorities as well. We would add these priorities to it and then reprioritize those in their
Got
work
it.
plan that comes back to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Jackson?
Yeah, just briefly, I hope that a part of this is if we do need to revise the comprehensive plan, that we part of the discussion is that arc towards the next comprehensive plan, because I know we came into 2018 with directions from 2008 saying we want to have these small area plans and work on that. So I hope that I think that I didn't really see that. I read it as best I could. It's very dense. You've worked very hard on this. It's a massive undertaking. But I hope that arc towards the next comprehensive plan or changes between now and 2028 are part of the discussion.
Chair, Commissioners, I think that could be something that is proposed by the commissions, wherever the item is in the work plan. They may say, I have no idea what they'll say, but they could, in fact, like, we will not undertake ADUs now. We talked about them in the previous comp plan and decide not to allow them. This is something where society is moving towards. We've heard more interest and we think it should be included in the next comp plan. That may be a decision that they take, but we did not lay out in this implementation plan when or how or if they should be included, just that the task force believes that they should be included, and it's up to now the commissions to analyze and get information and then have them go through the approval process and the timing.
So what I'm directing or suggesting is that in these, all of the different aspects of which people will be looking at, whether it's staff or commissions, that's one of the questions that they ask is, do we need to realign the vision of the city in order to accomplish this goal, or is this an element so that we get that storyline when all is done? So it's just an additional lens to look at all the analysis with, that, are we going to stick with the small area plans and the single family housing, or, status quo for the rest of the city or not? So that's just an added layer that I'd like to see as they deliberate. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to mention, there is, Commissioner Staunton, you mentioned the missing middle. And there's a lot of opportunity within the implementation plan in order to create certain infill projects, it seems to me, that can be extremely tasteful, extremely corollary to the immediate and surrounding area, going from putting a twin home, in other areas they will call them duplexes, they're not technically duplexes, into some areas where that fits makes sense. And it does, because you can go to extremely expensive, extremely upscale areas around the country and you find this commonplace. You can walk through Washington, D.C., you can go to Edmonton, Canada. You can go to exclusive lakeshore properties around the area, and you'll find that there's a bunkhouse or a guest house or something that's been converted. It's so common and can be done well, and I just encourage when the work plans come forward that is brought into consideration. There needs to be a good fit, but there's a good opportunity here as well to address the missing middle and other housing needs. It's nice work. Thank you.
Commissioner Staunton, anything further? No. Mr. Pierce? Oh, all right. So I just want to make sure I understand the process here. You're asking us to approve the implementation plan, direct staff to incorporate that into future work plans. So to the extent those, the implementation report is embraced by, let's say, the Planning Commission as an illustration, and we're asking them to look at whether we should allow accessory dwelling units in an R1 neighborhood, as we've discussed before, or we should allow what Commissioner Anderson is talking about, modification or changing the code to allow for an R2 zoning in some particular parts of town where what he advanced as the notion makes sense. That's still all got to come back to us, and because part and parcel of that is a potential change in the code.
That's right.
So this is just put it on the work plan, see if it makes sense, come back to us with your recommendation, and we'll decide if we agree with them or not. Is that it?
Chair, Commissioners, that is correct. It's similar to the, when the Planning Commission presented parking. That was on their work plan to revisit the parking code. So they investigated, they did the research, and they presented something to you for approval. So if they were going to upzone or change the zoning and allow for a greater density on a single-family lot through twin homes, ADUs, or what all, they would need to come back to you for approval.
Mr. Chair, that's exactly right. Most of these changes are going to involve some kind of ordinance change at the least. Maybe there's other kind of policy changes involved, but this is just signaling to staff again, and also to boards and commissions, that you want this to happen, and that these recommendations are going to be begin to be filtered back into work plans, and it's because you want to see their recommendations and their input on the same.
Okay, good. Thank you. With that, any further discussion on the issue? Otherwise, entertain a motion to approve the implementation plan and direct staff to incorporate that plan into the future work plans of the various boards and commissions that would be appropriate as recommended by staff. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pierce, second by Commissioner Jackson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. On to HRA Commissioner comments. Bill, I forgot about one thing. When you showed that view, and we're talking about the bridge from, let's say, from east towards the west, you know. Yeah, so it was shown as asphalt. Is that just a temporary installation as asphalt? Because I think we should have a discussion on what that pathway ought to look like.
Oh, let's see, the rendering, I think it painted the sidewalk gray, but it'll be a concrete sidewalk, just like most sidewalks we build in the community.
Okay.
And then the bridge will have a concrete deck.
All right.
So yeah, the rendering may not have had the exact right colors, but it would be a traditional sidewalk.
Okay. All right. That gives me a little more comfort. I just didn't want it to be an asphalt pathway, you know, unless it was temporary. But I think concrete or stamped concrete like we have in front of City Hall, that would look good. That would look better than regular concrete, but there's food for thought. And then my only other comment, anybody else have comments? Was on the item that was on the consent agenda, Stephanie, incredible work really on that single-family ownership preservation program. The folks that are calling you and saying they're interested in this program, it's really quite remarkable.
Thank you. I'm really excited by it. I got draw requests for 3 more closings today. We've had 33 houses, interested sellers call us, so we have a list of 33. Our goal was 3. So we've exceeded our goal by at least the level of interest. And so we honestly think that we'll, this $2 million probably, I mean, I should knock on wood about timeline of when it would be spent, but there's a lot of great interest. And some sellers have sold their homes at actually a loss because they believe in this program.
Yeah, that's great. Incredible. All right, Executive Director Neal, and then we got a quick update on Lot 3 at Pentagon Village from Bill Neuendorf.
Right, and I'm wondering, given the time, whether we need to do this today.
No, this is just a simple update. There's, in the next week or so, the City Council will consider the zoning on Lot 3 at Pentagon. If that's approved, expect to see a companion change to the TIF agreement in the next couple weeks. That's the update.
Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. Just a question. We have yet to really see the building materials that would be used on the exterior. Is that possible to arrange, or should that just be done one-on-one with those guys?
In regard to the Pentagon project?
Yes.
They should have a material board. It usually works its way through Planning Commission and City Council. In the world of virtual meetings, I'm not sure if there's a photo or if they used to have the actual sample board. I'm not sure how Carrie does that. But we could ask and definitely see that.
We'll find
they
that
still
for
have
you.
to show us what materials they will be using.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Anything else, folks? Anything else, Director Neal?
No.
All right, good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Got a motion from Commissioner Anderson, second from Commissioner Jackson to adjourn. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Good work.